it does say it's a public meeting. Do many people watch it, do you know?
We're ready to go now, Chair.
Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to the Health and Overview and Scrutiny panel. I'm Councillor Mark Jeffrey, Chair of the Health and Overview and Scrutiny panel. Members of the public are invited to view this meeting online. Those present are requested to keep their microphones on mute and to only turn them on when you're called to speak. Members are requested to keep your cameras turned on at all times. Officers and external presenters are requested to turn your cameras on only when you are presenting your reports or answering questions. Members have read the reports, so presenters, please just highlight any developments that have occurred since publication. If you'd like to speak, please either raise your hand or write your name and RTS request to speak in the chat function. I would now like to invite those present to introduce themselves. So, Judith.
My name is Judith Smythe. I'm the Councillor for St Jude Ward in Portsmouth.
Thank you. Councillor Richardson? You're on mute.
Sorry. Councillor Richardson representing Havant Borough Council.
Thank you. Councillor Atchell?
Councillor Vivian Atchwell, representing Winchester City Council, and I also am from the Shedfield and Whiteley Ward.
Thank you. Councillor David Evans?
I'm a councillor in East Hants for Horndean, and I represent the southernmost part of Horndean.
Thank you. Okay, so we've had apologies from Councillor Brown, Oliver, Pepper and Briggs. Are there any other apologies? No. And now to declarations of interest.
Apologies. I'm not sure whether Councillor Gerarda is on this committee, but she's on maternity leave at the moment.
Yeah, I think she was. I don't think she is, but thanks. Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Smythe. So declarations of interest. Could I ask if anyone has any declarations of interest? No.
No.
So should we go straight on to the first agenda item, which is agenda item 4, the Stroke Recovery Service. So Andy Biddle, Director of Adult Social Care.
Sorry, Chair.
Are we doing the minutes, Chair?
Minutes of the previous meeting.
Oh yeah, sorry. My apologies. So going through the meeting, the minutes of the previous meeting, are there any things to raise? No? Okay. So I've got next down here, agenda item 4, Stroke Recovery Service. Andy Biddle, Director of Adult Social Care at Portsmouth City Council. Andy, could you give us a brief summary of your report, and then members will ask you questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the report's in front of you. I haven't included a lot of the background information on this occasion because we had this report, similar report at the last HOS, but there's a link under section 3 if anyone wanted to see that background information. So the update to this report is in this month for this HOS. We met with the Stroke Association in October. The leader of the council and the cabinet member for community wellbeing, health and care met with the Stroke Association in October and had a discussion about whether it would be realistic for a stroke recovery service to be implemented in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight by December 2024. If you recall, that was the limit of the funding that the City Council had made available to the Stroke Association in Portsmouth. And I've included a paragraph there about the the requirement to work with the voluntary sector from the national guidance issued by NHS England for information on the second page. The Stroke Association felt that this was a reasonable time frame and that they could work with the ICB if requested to in terms of picking up a contract for the kind of services that they provide or currently in Portsmouth. They felt it could be replicated, but that whilst there are already services working with people who've experienced a stroke across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, and indeed in Portsmouth, that their services that they are providing are very different to that and work with a smaller number of people. So they felt that would be something that they could work up in reply to the leader's questions. What we agreed at that meeting is that the Stroke Association would investigate and bring back some analysis of work they're doing in other parts of the country directly for other ICBs, not only in terms of the contract specification and the kind of work that they're doing, but also in terms of the return on investment that they believe they provide in those areas for those NHS bodies. So that will be the next phase, if you like, in this particular discussion with them. And the leader and the cabinet member resolved that once they had that information, they would write again to Hampshire and Isle of Wight ICB, laying out that information and making the case for the Stroke Association to be part of the post-stroke recovery service implemented across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. That's a broad summary of the report. Of course, happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Members, do you have any questions? I know we've read the report. Do you have any questions? No. Okay, so thank you very much, Andy. We've noted your report, and we go on to agenda item 5, which is adult social care update. And that's you again, Andy. So please, could you give us a brief summary of your report, and then members will ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So overall, the report focuses on outcomes for our residents in Portsmouth. We had a discussion at the last board that we presented an adult social care report to about trying to include more of the outcomes, make it more outcome focused for members. So that's what we've done here. I'll just pick up on some highlights from it. It's obviously a relatively long report with the appendices, so I won't go through it in detail. So it's worth highlighting the legislative changes, which include the Care Quality Commission inspection, which came into the powers were granted, the initial powers were granted under the 2022 Health and Care Act, and there's secondary legislation that's in the process of being signed off in Parliament to enable the Care Quality Commission to have the powers to inspect local authorities' duties under the Care Act, how they fulfil them. We've now seen reports published from the 5 pilot sites that CQC work with. That happened last week. So we're still in the process of analysing those, reviewing them to understand the reality of inspection on the ground comparative to what we knew thus far about how it was framed it was going to happen, and to take any lessons that we can from that. I suspect we will be in common with every other upper tier local authority in England, because obviously this is something that's been occupying a lot of time for us in terms of preparing for inspection. There's further information around preparation for inspection and assessment in the body of the report, so we focused that on quality and audit. We've got an update there from the principal social worker in Portsmouth. CQC are stating to us that the next tranche of local authorities to be inspected, which originally they planned for it to be about 20, will be announced in this calendar year. So they've got roughly another 4.5-5 weeks to do that. And our self-assessment document will come to a future scrutiny panel so that we can lay out our assessment of ourselves, how that's echoed or not, as the case may be, by our stakeholders, and also what our residents think of the provision in Portsmouth. That's the 3-pronged process to preparing our self-assessment and readiness for inspection. The report shows some positive outcomes around reducing waiting lists, particularly around those people that need the support of an occupational therapist, and the introduction of a more structured customer feedback experience with our occupational therapy service, so that we can shape how we work based on direct feedback from our residents, which is really positive. And we're also highlighting the training and development activities that we undergo to grow our own occupational therapists in Portsmouth, and people that have worked for us, maybe not in a qualified role, but then have progressed, have done their qualification and have learned and built their trade in Portsmouth. The report also highlights the work to bring together reablement services in Portsmouth and the aspiration that we have to enable more of our residents to have the opportunity for reablement, so that they maintain greater independence in their daily lives with proportionate support from purchased services. The report highlights a range of areas that our integrated learning disability service and our adult mental health services, which we provide in partnership with our Solent NHS Trust colleagues, are focused on. Those areas of focus linked to that reablement approach in terms of supporting our residents to maintain their independence, ensuring that as many of our services as possible are within the Portsmouth city, which helps maintain relationship networks for people that can be really important in their recovery journey, or indeed in developing and maintaining independence. And those approaches also resonate through our carers and independence and wellbeing service. And we've put some case studies and some feedback in the report to demonstrate outcomes for residents, demonstrate some of the individual outcomes for residents, and ensure that as many of us, the analytical tools used to measure our outcomes. What we're trying to do whenever we're working in a preventative way, getting in early with people to help try and stop them needing services later on, is ensure that we can measure that in a reasonable way so we understand what we're achieving. The report also highlights plans to engage with our residents about data and how data is returned nationally and around some of the work that we undertake. And we've also highlighted the demand pressures for the service across both services that we purchase on residents' behalf, but also those that we provide, such as deprivation of liberty, mental health act assessment and safeguarding. And finally, the report sets out a summary of our strategy, which guides all of the work that we do in Portsmouth and adult social care, and highlights some of our governance arrangements and how we work with our providers in the city. That's a broad summary of the report, but happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. We can take members' questions. Also like to welcome Councillor Graham Heaney.
Hello, yes, apologies for being late. One of my students wanted to see me about something and it took rather longer than I had anticipated, so apologies for that.
No problem at all. So it's over now to members. We're on agenda item 5. So it's over to members for any questions to Andy. Okay. Councillor Richardson, please. You're on mute.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry about that. Hello, Andy. In terms of the CQC regulation and your self-assessment, how are you judged, particularly on things that say you have no control on? So, for instance, taking people out of hospital, you know, and transition and things like that. That, you know, other organisations will impact on some of the things that you do and vice versa. So how are you judged in terms of your CQC, concerns there?
Thanks, Councillor. I mean, what we know thus far, and obviously we haven't had that direct experience of the inspection yet, is that we will be judged on those things. You're absolutely right. Delayed transfers of care and transition for younger residents who become 18 and need adult care support will be part of what CQC look at. So they'll very much look at what we do, rather than necessarily what's in the control of other organisations. But what they'll also be looking for, as we understand it, is how we work in partnership. So whilst you can't always control all of those triggers or all of those levers as an organisation, if you've identified a problem, if you've identified a block, how do you then work in partnership with that other organisation to try and make those transitions as smooth as possible? I guess a good example for hospital discharge is the work that we've done with our Integrated Care Board colleagues and our Solent NHS Trust colleagues to have a discharge to assess unit in Portsmouth that's staffed by staff from both organisations, enabling people to come out and have time to breathe and to think about what their next move is, but also to offer some reablement support within that. So those kind of resources, initiatives, services are what we're going to be talking to CQC about when they talk to us about how we manage hospital discharge. In terms of transition, it'll be about how early we get involved in that journey, how we make sure that we identify all of our younger residents who may need support and not just the ones, for example, that may come through our learning disability services. And so it'll be about how we use our intelligence, how we think about our planning, how we get in there good and early so that both the young person understands the journey into adult social care, if that's what they need, and their family does as well, because it can often be a bit of a cliff edge for families of children with disabilities particularly. And so those are the kind of areas that CQC will be looking at.
Thank you, Chair. May I just have one more question relating to this? Thank you. So in your report, you talk about the learning disability services and you particularly talk about transition. Now, I'm retired now after a few years, but I worked in the tertiary referral centre for young people with learning disability and epilepsy. So one of the things that we were doing in those days, which is probably now about 10 years ago since I was right in the heart of that, we started the transition process at the age of 14. Now, that slipped over time. And what we found is that, you know, all of a sudden you were getting a whole load of young adults, and some of them were actually still 21 because they went into extended adulthood. And so they were landing on our doorstep on the adult services, and we were having to fight like mad to get them places. So nothing seems very much to have changed since then. I mean, yes, I'm sure it has, but I guess in terms of time that it takes, it doesn't seem to have progressed. Looking at your report, you're still having the same problems.
We do, yeah, we do have some difficulties because, of course, for a lot of people, we're talking about quite complex needs, quite complex situations and circumstances. I think we've had some success of late because because of the nature of our learning disability services, particularly because of the integrated nature. So NHS colleagues working with social care colleagues.
Yes.
We've got a support team made up of NHS colleagues that are lodged with that service. And so we can often do some work to ensure that we're still meeting needs, but helping people be in a more appropriate environment as they turn 18. We're also in the very early stages of discussing about how we think about commissioning services within a children's social care environment, but with an adult social care head on, if you like, so that we're thinking about that journey much earlier. I think we still do have challenges. I think you're absolutely right, but we're gradually getting there. It's a fairly slow process, but I think we're putting more and more resources, more and more thought into that earlier connection in the journey.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Next, Councillor David Evans, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got three questions I'd like to ask, please. The first one is referring to page 23. There's a table of ethnicity of service users. Now, the current considerable trouble we have with anti-Semitism and protests is in part reported to be because various groups of society don't consider Jews to be an ethnic minority. And they are recognised as an ethnic minority and a racial group. So I think it's helpful to include that in this sort of table. Jews are roughly 0.5% of the population. So they're small, but excluding them, avoiding mentioning that their ethnicity is not helpful in society. I'll just leave that comment with you to think. Thank you, Mr. Biddle. You're nodding your head, I see. Thank you for that. Next point, page 28 and 29. There's two tables, graphs 7.1 and 7.2, talk about gradual increase and significant increase. I'm trying to turn to that page now. Now, I'm not a statistician, but the graphs there seem to indicate things are changing, but they both have suppressed zeros, and the changes are quite minimal. In order to demonstrate that something's significant, I think you need to go back over more than 1 year. I think you need to be looking at something that over maybe 3 years as a minimum before you can actually say that the change you're talking about is significant. I think that plays into if changes are significant, then you need to do something about it. But if actually they aren't over a period of several years, then you could be looking to make changes that aren't actually needed. That's that point. I'll leave that with you for considering. My final point is page 41. I will spin through to it and find it so I can make sure I'm not talking absolute rubbish. I've been a councillor for 12 years now, and I'm quite used to talking rubbish, but I try not to. Right, page 41, new posts. I've lost it now. All right, at the top of page 41, recruited 2 new posts, data analyst and business analyst. And it says, this is area that has not been resourced for a number of years. Now, I wouldn't pretend to know exactly what these individuals are going to be monitoring and working on, but it's, in my experience, a sort of maxim of management that if you're not measuring it, you're not managing it. Now, so my question is, if you haven't been monitoring data for several years, then you haven't been managing whatever the data is monitoring for several years. And I think that if that assessment is a stronger word, but if that comment makes sense, then please take that on board. And if it doesn't make sense, please tell me and I'll shut up. Thank you.
So I wouldn't presume to tell you to shut up, Councillor. No, I think that the point. So it's a fair comment. We do return a reasonable amount of data. We're required to by the organisation NHS Digital. So we do national returns. We also do some local returns and local data. I think the point is that we've, given the pressure that there's been in local authorities since 2010 onwards in terms of staffing, headcount, numbers, we haven't had some of the posts in that we've needed to help us make data informed decisions. And I think those 2 posts, in fact, I know those 2 posts are to help us make better use of the data we've got rather than not having measured it. Now, having said that, there's always improvements. There's absolutely always improvements that we can make in the data that we collect and how we do the so what piece, so that the data is meaningful, because it enables us to make changes where they're needed. And as you rightly point out, not to chase after a change that we don't need to do. So I think it's that extra capacity that enables us to get better at using it rather than the fact we haven't been looking at it, if that's helpful.
It is, thank you. Yes, that's what I wanted to hear. And you've taken on the other points that I raised. I'll leave those with you.
Thank you. Next, could I have Councillor Judith Smythe? You've got a question.
Yes, I've got 3 questions all related to the figures in the report. The first thing is the age of the service users. I noticed on page 23, top middle table, we've got not specified on age, 22.3%. And frankly, that means the whole of the rest of the table is actually it really is not that useful. If all of those 22% or a lot of them are in the 90 plus, which I'm sure there must be more than 2% in there, then our policies and our approaches will be very different than if they're all in the 18 plus, or a lot of them are. Will you be able to get that table a bit more accurate in the future? Because that seems to me is crucial because of the very different settings and the very different situations that apply between the age groups there.
That I don't know, actually, because I don't know whether they were not specified because they chose not to specify and that was a choice that they made, or for another reason. So I'll have a look into that, Councillor, and I'll come back to you.
I think if you could, it makes a nonsense of that table. Now, the second thing is the ethnicity table, and I take Councillor Evans' point on the specification of people of Jewish heritage, providing those people representing those communities would want to be identified. The other thing, though, is I'm very concerned at the relatively low level of Black African, Black Caribbean and Black Other, 0.2%. I think that demonstrates that we're not reaching out to some of the people who surely have some of the disabilities that your service users would be characterised by. And if I was talking to you in the 1970s and 80s, when I was used to teach equality of opportunity and that sort of thing, among other things I did at that age, I would be saying that was a clear indication that we are either being just ignoring that community, haven't been able to reach out to them, or indeed that our staff are being racist. So can we do something about that, please?
We can certainly have a look into that. I think what the table shows is that we are reaching out to communities, diverse communities in Portsmouth, beyond our standard white British community, if you like. I can't comment on those specifically. It is part of our role within that particular service to reach out to different and diverse communities. So I'd like to, in answering your question, I'd like to take a considered view of that and have a discussion with the service themselves and understand what's behind that, rather than
in the old days,
I know that kind of detail.
But please, could you bring back a report on it? That's what I'm asking for you, because in the old days, that would have been like a test you'd give to a whole room of public servants, social workers, if you like, and that's the thing you would want them to notice. There are more than 0.2, well, added together, more than 0.6% of our population is from the Black African, Black Caribbean and Black Other. And we know that the incidence of mental health in many areas, for example, is quite high among Black African, Black Caribbean peoples, and particularly now that we know that many of those people will have experienced some trauma as refugees or whatever. Those figures are incredible, and I would be very concerned that somebody might interpret them as racist behaviour from our staff across the whole of the patch. We all know that, but let's do something about it. So a detailed report would be really useful, please. Those are the two
Councillor Smythe, can I
main things.
Adjourn the meeting for a moment because I'm feeling unwell. I've spoken to the Democratic Services Officer, so the procedure will need to be that we'll need to adjourn the meeting and then you elect a chair while I have to go.
I'm so sorry. Do get well soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes.
Okay, take care.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Okay, members. So obviously, if we could have nominations or volunteers for someone to carry on chairing the meeting, please, that would be appreciated.
So Lahini, I know you have deputised before. I'm happy to support you if you're happy to take over.
I've got another meeting to go to later, so I might have to leave a bit early. Okay. I don't know if my colleague Judith, who is also my ward colleague, would be happy to do it.
I could do it if you. It would help her have some experience in this matter.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so is everyone happy for Councillor Smythe to continue chairing the meeting? Obviously,
yes.
Ordinarily we'd have the vice chair, but she's not here today. So, okay, lovely. Thank you, Councillor Smythe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, are we back on air yet?
Yes, we are. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if I can refer, the next question then is coming from Councillor Heaney on this report. I had anyway finished the request for a further report on the number of on some of the tables on page 23. So, Councillor Heaney, would you like to go ahead with your question, please?
Thank you, Judith. Yes, I had 2 or 3 questions actually to ask. The first one relates to page 18. It talks about the number of referrals we've had to the Learning Disability Service, and I'm curious about the significant numbers over the last 2 years and what may have caused that. It does seem rather unusual, but we've had such a high number of referrals. Can you explain what the reasoning for that is, or why we have suddenly had all that? It can't be people moving from outside of the city, I assume, because that seems again a rather unusual and large number. So,
no, we do see more people coming through transition at the moment. So as we were speaking about earlier, those of our younger residents who become adults and need service support from adult social care. We've also seen quite a significant growth in those of our residents that are eligible for continuing healthcare, and I think that's the point that the service makes, sort of in the second paragraph of that, about needing some extra support. From our ICB colleagues, which has been agreed, the funding has been agreed to recruit learning disability nursing staff for that. So I think that the combination of people turning 18 needing support coming through, and the number of people who have become eligible for continuing healthcare in our city who have a learning disability are the 2 main growth groups that I'm aware of. But no, we haven't seen a significant number of people moving into the city who then become eligible for Portsmouth support. Some people will move into the city and be funded by another local authority, for example, but those are the 2 categories that I'm aware of, or categories of need that I'm aware of. And as I say, with those of our residents who are eligible for continuing healthcare, that was significant enough that there was a case made for extra resources to the ICB, which was agreed.
Thank you. Second question is relating to page 31 and the Mental Health Act assessments. I was rather surprised to read that psychiatrists who work for Southern NHS aren't under any obligation to do these assessments and are actually not doing them, and because it's not part of their contracted work, which seems very unusual. I'm just really surprised, and I don't know whether it's probably not an issue for us to deal with, but I'm just wondering if that could be addressed, because it seems to me that that would be part of your role, I would have thought, but maybe I'm misunderstanding something here.
So we do have some continual issues with being able to complete Mental Health Act assessments in a timely way. It tends to be around the coordination, the transport, and having a bed in a secure hospital to apply for, which is the process under the Mental Health Act. But there have been difficulties with ensuring it's known as Section 12 doctors are available to help complete those assessments. This is something that we keep under continual review. It's very difficult to speak for the contractual obligations under another organisation. I suppose I come back a bit to Councillor Richards' point about what's in your control and what's not. So, and I think we also have to acknowledge that there is a national and local issue in terms of being able to recruit sufficient staff to be able to fulfil all of those duties. And as I say, we're seeing that played out both nationally and locally. So I don't really have a solution for that, and I share your concern that we're not able to always respond in as timely a manner as we'd want to. We are continuing to address that. We have very good partnership relationships with everyone involved in Mental Health Act assessments, the police, our Solent colleagues, our ICB colleagues, but we are seeing strain in that particular system at the moment.
I'm just going to go back a bit because I missed my place. Page 27.
And I was just going to say, Graham, should we ask for some sort of report back on that, because it seems really serious, that.
I think it would. I mean, I don't know if we've got anyone from Solent here today, because I would think I might ask them that question them directly. But yeah, I think it would be worthwhile if that would be helpful. Yes. Just want to move on to Russets, which is on page 27. It talks about the inspection and it requires improvement. And there's been a meeting about the improvement or action plan and improvements. So are we getting a positive response from them to say that we are on the right track? Because it doesn't actually say that. And are we going to be re-inspected at some point, or is Russets going to be re-inspected at some point to confirm that it is now moved out of the requires improvement?
We do. So we have we have an internal governance procedure, and we've alluded to some of that in the report, but we haven't gone into as much detail as we could have done, because the length of the report, really. Yeah. So we have, because we run regulated services, so Russets, Harry Sotnick House and Shearwater in the city, we have regular, once upon a time we would have called them mock inspections, what we call them now is informal inspections, carried out by a team that comes from a separate area of the business, and we do that in all of our regulated services. And we also have a group within regulated services that regularly monitor quality, improvements, change, etc. So I think as far as we can, we're as assured as we can be around the judgment. The judgment was a long time ago, relatively long time ago for Russets. The difficulty with re-inspection is that currently the Care Quality Commission, given all of the duties they fulfil, are pursuing what they call an intelligence-led inspection regime. So they'll prioritise those areas, those services that they're most concerned about. And that could be on the basis of the number of complaints they receive, intelligence from the public, intelligence from local authorities, etc. Because don't forget, of course, CQC regulate all care home services. So I think the fact that CQC haven't turned up again could be seen as a positive, because it would imply there isn't the intelligence there to suggest there's an issue. But we don't know when they'll come out. We fill out a pre-inspection report for Russets, and we have done one of those, but we haven't got any indication of when they might come out to us. So between our internal governance and the fact that we haven't had a re-inspection, I think we're probably as confident as we can be. I'm sorry, that's not a definitive answer, but it's probably the best I can give at the moment.
Yeah, that's clear. I think I understand.
You've gone on to mute, Councillor. Oh, you're back off.
Sorry. I'm back again.
Anything else from you, Graham?
last question, page 32, where it talks about the improved mental health professional team not getting referrals from the Treasury's mental health crisis breathing space programme. And there's mention of a court case. Is this because the scheme's not very well designed for referrals? Because it talks about a court case about eligibility. So are we struggling to find people who are eligible? And is it the eligibility criteria that are a problem that they've created?
I don't believe so. I think it is purely we're just not seeing people referred. I think there's probably something there because it is a relatively recent development. So there is probably something there about familiarity. So where services in the city are familiar with the fact that there is extra support available around people suffering with financial issues and referring them in. But I've not had it brought to my attention there's particularly an issue with criteria around this. I think the city's relatively well connected. There's some quite strong relationships between services that would come into contact with our residents with a mental health problem. And so I'd be confident in that, but I think we may be seeing this as a settling in period. But I'd be happy to go and confirm that and come back to you with a bit more detail if that was helpful.
I think that'd be helpful, yes, yeah, because we are hearing lots more cases of individuals who are having debt problems and they're causing mental health crisis, family breakdown, etc. So I was just wondering, well, is it? But I think you've explained it. We may have good other services that are providing support. So they're maybe given as you say, it's fairly new, it may not be being picked up quite so well. So that's a relevant point. Sorry to interrupt, but the cost of living response from Portsmouth City Council in particular has been quite strong. Well, for the past couple of years, and I think we've got those dedicated resources. So there will be different places that people come into contact for debt advice and support. So that, could well be an influential factor, I think. Right, that's the end of my questions then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. Councillor Richardson, you're next.
Thank you, Councillor Smythe. It's really more of a comment on something that you said, Councillor Smythe, and just to sort of check with Andy, really, in terms of Black, African and Caribbean client service users. In my former role, I mean, we had a real job sort of reaching these people because it's a very stigmatized area. They really don't want to engage with us, and even when they were really poorly and came to us after that, they didn't want to sign anything or actually be included in any data. And I think it was more of a stigmatized thing than it was about staff not engaging, because ours was an inner London area, so there were a lot of Black Africans and Black Caribbeans there, so they just didn't want to engage.
I think that's our research can only find out whether that's the case or not. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Atchwell.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I was just going to page 28 of the report, residential and nursing care. So you're saying there's a significant increase in demand. I just wonder if you can just explain how we're going to meet that demand, because obviously it's going to continue going up. Thank you.
There's various ways, and some of them are short-term meeting demand and some of them are longer-term planning. What we did some years ago was put quite a lot of effort into creating what we call extra care environments in the city, where somebody has their own front door and their own tenancy, but there's care available on site to them. And that can be programmed care and support, but also if someone had a care emergency, let's say overnight, reactive care and support as well. So that's part of our long-term planning is having the right number of extra care units in the city. And that's certainly part of our planning at the moment as to whether we need further extra care in the city that then reduces the number of people that need care homes. I think one of our challenges in the short term is that we've seen a number of providers leave the city in the past 12 months or so, and that's lost some hundreds of beds. And so we have a reduced residential care market. Pre-pandemic, we had overcapacity, and we were concerned and worried about, how we manage that, because having too many care homes makes them unviable because they're not full enough, and that leads to issues around financial management. We now have, it's fair to say, more restriction than we'd like around the number of places. That is changing, that is fluctuating a little, but we've got a defined number of care homes in the city, and that's now not going to change, we think. So that's one of our issues with increasing and making plans to manage that. I think the best way to do that, I think, is that longer term planning around extra care, so that we're creating more care environments that aren't necessarily residential care homes. Inevitably, I think we will see more people than we'd like placed outside of the city. And for Portsmouth's a place with a very strong identity. And so we always try, and if we need to make a placement, we always try and place people within the city and environment they know. It maintains kinship networks and all those kind of things. So I think inevitably we will see more difficulty in doing that. But our key is the long-term planning, I think, to try and come up with more care environments to then spread that demand out.
Should I just ask another question on that then? So do you not have like a 5-year...
Go ahead if you have a second question.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Do you have like a 5-year plan in place where you think this might go?
We do. We have
like that.
Well, we're working to refresh our accommodation strategy, which talks about accommodation in its widest sense. So that may be somewhere where someone needs to permanently live, or it may be some short stay care, replacement care, or respite care if they're living with a carer. And indeed, that also involves things like trying to expand our shared lives service, where people have care but they live in a family home, which is very popular. So we're working on a strategy. It's not there at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? If I might ask one more then, Andy. Is there anything that's said in this report add to bed locking that the health service might be experiencing from us, or would that be, we'll probably hear about that a bit later, but is there anything in this report that we should be noting that, for example, the reduced numbers of residential or nursing homes, does that affect hospital discharge?
It will have an impact. It's always difficult to prove that relationship, that direct relationship, but certainly having below the number that we'd want in the city around residential care homes will impact. What we try to do as a piece of good practice is never to place anyone directly from hospital into 24-hour residential care. It's not great that you saw your front door, you were admitted, and then you never see your front door again. Put in very simple terms. And so there will be an impact, but we try and minimise direct placements from hospital. I don't think there's anything else in the report that does impact on delayed transfers of care. We know at the moment there is a particular area of pressure, not only in Portsmouth, but up and down the country, in emergency departments and in people moving through and flow from hospitals. And so Portsmouth has its fair share of work to do around that as a local authority. But I don't think there's anything else in the report that relates to that.
Thank you very much. Unless there's any further questions, thank you for that long report, and I think justifiably long. And I hope you feel that we've been helpful in moving that whole issue before. Thank you very much to you and your team. We now could move to item. Thank you. So we now move to item 6, which is the Solent NHS Trust update, page 71 to 76. Do we have Alistair Snell here?
No, Alistair Snell's my Chief Operating Officer. My name is Andrew Strevens. I'm the Chief Executive of Solent NHS Trust, and when my diary became free, I decided to come into this meeting rather than my Chief Operating Officer. So, hello.
Welcome, Andrew.
Hello.
Thank you.
So you could go ahead and introduce your report, and then we'll go to questions in the usual way and confirm.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take the report as read. I mean, there are key things in there. The move out of the QA building to Jubilee House, and hopefully you have seen the pictures at the back of the report as well. The staff are delighted to be in there. I think it's going to be a much better patient experience as well. Because we have now repurposed Jubilee House, we are in the process of renaming what is the Jubilee units within Harry Socknick House, and I'm hoping that they'll be able to tell you what the name is next week when we send the paperwork into the CQC. But as the report says, it is linked to Conan Doyle and the desire of the council to kind of make that more of a literary city, which I think is very good. There's the report in terms of the podiatry service as well, and hopefully that you can see that, and that makes sense to concentrate at the St Mary's campus, and we have been involving Healthwatch in those discussions as well. And then finally, the biggest thing is Project Fusion, where we have signed off the full business case. It's now with our regulator. Copies of the full business case are available. There is an engagement event which is being lined up with the local authority leads for Portsmouth and Southampton, which should happen over the next few weeks. I'm going to say so things are progressing as expected with the creation of the new trust planned for the 1st of April 2024. So I'm happy to take questions on that, and I'm also happy to hopefully answer.
So we can see some photographs. We can see some photographs at the back of the report. Thank you for those.
Yeah.
Are there any questions or comments or anything anybody else wants to say on this one? Graham Heaney.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Heaney, go ahead.
Two questions I wanted to ask. One follows on from the previous report we had, because I asked Andy Biddle something that we'd had in the report about mental health act assessments. It says here, talking about mental health, there is a recruitment challenge for most NHS trusts at this time, and those doctors who are working in the trust are mostly reluctant to assist us, as this is not part of their contractual work. This work leads to delays in responses. This is reference to psychiatrists, and I was just wanting to ask whether you have any reason as to why psychiatrists aren't in a position to do that and why they aren't contracted, because I thought that was a very odd comment to have when people are working for an NHS system, and one would expect people to be able to be flexible in supporting services, and that they appear not to be doing that was a bit surprising.
Okay, I did hear that question.
Oh, you did? Oh, right, okay.
So, at which point I wasn't aware of the issue, at which point I was then on the phone to my operations director in relation to that. So I can give you a partial answer now, but I think there's a piece of work that needs to be done. So on the technical aspect, and I think it's shown within the reports, that it is the responsibility of Portsmouth City Council to do the Mental Health Act assessments. And I think the report also says that part of the issue is the requirements to have 2 Section 12 doctors. Now, I must admit, technically, I'm not quite sure what a Section 12 doctor is, but I recognise there's an issue. I think that there have been issues in terms of this is additional work. So the contract is with effectively Portsmouth City Council. I wasn't aware that there was an issue in terms of leaning in. I think actually that's something that my team needs to work with Andy's team about how an organisation like Solent and Southern, which we've created a new organisation, can lean in to help in terms of this. So I'd like to take that offline with Andy and maybe come back in due course on that.
That's okay. That'd be absolutely fine. Thank you very much for that, and thank you very much for your swift intelligence gathering to find out what's going on. So thank you. Let me go back to the report. Oops. Is that something,
Graham, that we want some sort of report back to the Health and Wellbeing Board, this committee? I think probably would, either in a note on the minutes or either
that or it get picked up in Andy's next report that he does to us. Would say that we've now addressed this issue and it's been resolved. So that may well be the way to do it. But yeah.
I think it's quite important because that delays there can cause patient harm and even occasionally put people at risk to themselves or the public. So I think it's quite important.
Well, I suppose if we get the chance to get it out before the minutes, by the time the minutes are published and available, if that's before our agenda, then that's great. But obviously, if they go out at the same time as our meeting agenda, I'm not quite sure if they do get sent to us in advance. I don't think they normally do, but that would be fine. The quicker we know about it, the better. The second question relates to podiatry services, and I know there's been quite a bit of discussion about location because I think the concern, if I remember the discussion, and also some discussion I had with Healthwatch, is that some people find it a bit more difficult to get to a central location, and they are having something in other parts of the city is useful. This seems to have been a bit of a unilateral decision by surgeries to close off their available spaces. Is there any possibility that there will be any consideration given to possible location of satellite clinics or satellite operations that would allow people to access, be more close, you know, say north of the city, south of the city, of podiatry services?
I think that's a possibility to consider, but the information I have is that we have searched for alternative locations, and they're not available. But certainly we can consider and bring back. Let's say we are linking very closely with Health Watch, and I know that particularly Roger Battersby will be attending where we're intending to put the new podiatry service.
Yeah, I think he still has some concerns about the fact that there's not been, you know, this decision has now been made, and the opportunity to maybe consult on it hasn't really been available because it's been a unilateral decision by the surgeries to make those decisions. And so we've put in a bit of but if he's going to be involved in further discussions about it, that would be, I think that would be helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Graham, I think that's really helpful. As surveys done by Age Concern and others have shown that sore feet and the absence of public lavatories are the things that stop elderly people going out, and going out is good for mental and physical health. I think this is a really important area, and I wondered if we did have a mobile paediatric podiatrist, a mobile podiatrist that goes to people's homes in the event, or goes and indeed visits GPs at all, and I think this is a very important issue.
Can I just say, was that a question? Apologies, in terms of do we have?
Yes, it was. It was. A question. Well, are we considering that as part of considering a report back on podiatry?
I'd need to report back on that one, Councillor Smythe, liaising with the team, but I recognise the point you're making.
Thank you. Any more questions on that? Okay, let's move on so that we don't end up with a problem with quoracy. So item 7 is the next item on the agenda. Access to primary care, pages 77 to 84. Jo York is Jo with us?
Hello. Yes, yeah, with you.
Jo, I know you are moving on, so congratulations on that, but I'm glad you're still here for this item. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and sadly it will be my last meeting with you. So again, I'll assume you've read the report, but a couple of bits that I just wanted to pick out was that we have been working closely with local councillors from council officers, public health team from Portsmouth City Council on who hosted the GP Summit and Community Pharmacy Summit over the last couple of weeks. And these have been really positive events to get all partners around the table and think about, in light of some of the national challenges and local challenges we have around recruitment and access, what are we doing locally and how can we support our primary care colleagues? So we had some earlier GP summits earlier this year, and some actions around GP recruitment, which is ongoing, and working with Portsmouth Primary Care Alliance colleagues and the hospital and Solent colleagues on taking that forward, and also looking at how we can better support community pharmacies and improving the relationships and close partnership working between community pharmacies and general practice as well in primary care. So a number of actions will be coming out of that, including looking at same-day emergency care solutions in the city. The other point of note is the enhanced service review, where we have done a piece of work across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight to ensure we've got a consistent offer around some of the locally commissioned services that we commission GP practices for outside of their core contract, and that was really to get a standardisation across the board. Within that, we are of course making sure that we don't destabilise any individual practice where they may have lost funding for a particular service that won't continue. So that is also in place just to ensure that we allow practices the time to manage that change in funding and approach. But they were the key things from this report specifically. probably other just to note is that the acute infection, the ARI hub went live at the beginning of this week, so slightly ahead of schedule from when we wrote the report. Again, due to some of the pressures that we've got in the system, and as you'll see from the report, we're continuing to see high demand for our primary care services. So that's probably the key points on this report. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I think this report is encouraging. By the way, just in case I should have declared an interest, I am a patient at the Trafalgar Medical Group practice and very keen on their move to Handley's Corner. I'm just an ordinary patient at that practice. Julie Richardson, your question or comment.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Chair, Councillor Smythe. Yeah, Joe, thank you. It's Julie Richardson. Thank you for responding yesterday to my email. The motion actually was dismissed because they didn't feel it was something that necessarily needed to be discussed in a local council meeting, a full council meeting. However, I did pass on the information that you sent me to the two councillors who raised that motion, and just so that other people are aware, it was about a lack of pharmacy services, or a perceived lack of community pharmacies, which surprised me because I couldn't actually see it in our local area particularly, but I think they were referring to the Bedhampton service, which did come to your attention, and I understand you offered them support in that. So really it was just to say thank you, and I'm very glad to see that there's a lot of work going on as far as community pharmacies are concerned, because they are a vital service to in primary care.
Yeah, thank you. And again, it's a problem we're going to see a bit more of, I think, and starting to become more of an issue, again, due to some of the contractual issues and cost of living crises. So it is important that we do more. We also pointed you to work with public health departments in the local authorities, who can also produce the pharmacy needs assessment as well, which can sort of give an opportunity to think about where do you absolutely need those community pharmacies to be. So hopefully that will help, but thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Is that all, Graham? Is that... No, it's Graham Heaney then who'd like to speak now.
I have two questions. One is a small question, really, and there's a reference on page 81 to a flu incentive scheme for patients in care homes, and saying that due to financial constraints, this is going to be discontinued. Given the vulnerability of patients in care homes, is that not a false economy? Because if they don't get their flu jabs, there's a real possibility they could end up in hospital, and this will cost the NHS more.
Yes, so I think it was that we were paying primary care practice services. It was only happening in Portsmouth, so the evidence was in other areas that didn't happen. But also there are other ways in which those flu jabs can be provided. So through the enhanced care home scheme and the enhanced care home DES. And through the community nursing team, which is what we used to do. So that scheme came about really through pressure in community nursing a number of years ago, but there are now other services that can take that approach through the PCN DES into enhanced care homes, rather than paying individual practices. So I don't think we'll see. I don't think there will be a risk of what you're saying, but it's just about how we're managing the money and getting best value for the money that we do put into primary care, into care homes.
Okay, sure. Thanks for that. That's reassuring. I didn't know whether there was something else because it wasn't clear from the comment. But,
no, sorry.
No. That's fine. That's reassuring. The other question is one that a little bit more troubling, really, because I notice on this report, which is about the Integrated Care Board, there is nothing about the financial problems that are existing. In fact, you find information about the financial issues in two other reports on this agenda, one in Andy's Biddle's report, and in the next report from the Health and Care Portsmouth. And they're not in this report, which is a great thing. So I'm going to refer to the two other reports when I ask the question. In the report we've had previously from Andy Biddle, it talks about the ICBs going through a mutually agreed redundancy phases that will continue to 2024, and this will have an impact on the shape of health and care Portsmouth on health services. High likelihood that as funding is redirected, reduced or stopped, creating funding pressures on ASC. The second element, which is in the report that we're going to consider next, refers to the deficit of the integrated care system being 137 million, and then talks a bit about, obviously the budget is massively more than that, and that some of the services around dentistry, GPs and community is responsible for about 31.6 million of that. The problem we have, I think, looking at this as a health and scrutiny panel, is that there is certainly indications that there are going to be problems for our service provision, but we don't really know what the impact of that is going to be, because the ICB, and I'm not trying to personalise you, it's the ICB, are not properly reporting to us what their position is, so that we can scrutinise and question what they may be planning to do in order to meet the deficit. And I think that's a real concern.
Okay, did you want me to?
Yeah, you could.
So apologies that we didn't reference the financial position in the primary care report. That was purely the ask for that report was around primary care access. And in terms of primary care access, you're absolutely right around the deficit, and that it is significant across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, and as we discussed previously, all organisations are in financial recovery support. However, the funding for primary care, both general medical services, general dental services, and community pharmacy and optometry services, they're all subject to national contracts. So the core funding for those services is if you like a pass-through money to the ICB. So for under the qualities and outcome framework for general practice, that's subject to national contract, and that money is paid on the achievement of the QOF, the quality and outcome framework standards within that tier of practice, and so their funding is weighted per population as well. So we wouldn't. That isn't money that the ICB can touch, and the same for dentistry. So we wouldn't be taking any funding out of those primary care services. The work we've done to review the local commission services, which is ICB funding, again, that wasn't to reduce funding into primary care. So we've put exactly the same amount of funding back in as was there previously, but it was to make sure we had a consistent and standardised approach. So that's why there's no reference to the deficit or services reducing in primary care as a result of that deficit, because there won't be, because they're core national contracts, and we're not taking any money out of those services as a result of deficits. That's not to say there's not difficulties in primary care achieving those standards and those activity contracts because of their workforce, and that's a particular challenge in NHS dentistry. I don't know if you want me to answer the other bit of the question until we get on to the report, but I suppose what I would say on that is we're doing a lot of work with partners in the NHS and with the ICB finance team around understanding our position for 24-25, and obviously NHS England. So it's not that we're not saying and not trying to be transparent about this, it's just that we're in that 24-25 planning round this year at the moment. That will go on probably through January and February, and that will enable us to understand what the budgets will need to be for 24-25, and if there then will be any potential impact on services in the city and the staffing budgets. We know that nationally ICBs have to reduce their running costs by 30 to 40%. So again, that will be by the end of next December, so that we'll be able to come back later in the year when we're doing the consultation and show some of the impact of the staffing structures and how we've reduced those running costs.
Yeah.
Hopefully that answers your questions.
I know it's complicated.
Yeah.
I think the concern, that 137 million is 137 million recurring. It's not a one-off saving, it's recurring. So there is going to be an impact on services. As Health and Scrutiny Committee's panels, we do have a duty to look at service changes, particularly if they're going to affect patients, and we do have a right to be able to question and challenge that necessarily. So we will hopefully have an opportunity to do that. I think the other thing that slightly concerns me is we're talking about Portsmouth, but of course this is now Hampshire-wide, and what happens in Hampshire, I think obviously is for Hampshire to decide. They have their own health and scrutiny panel, but I think there's possibly an issue here where we may need to work with the health and scrutiny panel in Hampshire about how we approach these issues, because I think there's some potential joint implications for what happens. So there may be some specific Portsmouth implications, but there may be some wider Hampshire implications which affects both areas and both health and scrutiny panels. And I know in the past there have been joint reviews taking place between the health and scrutiny panels of Hampshire and Portsmouth when there's been service changes that have affected both. And maybe we need to think about whether some discussions might take place between the relevant chairs of the panels about what might be of relevance and how we might approach it, because it seems to me there's a possibility, not now, but maybe next year when we know more, that we might want to do that. So I'm just sort of flagging that up as an issue to think about.
Yeah, I think that would make sense if that's what the panel wanted to do, because the financial position will also affect the the services in Southampton and the Isle of Wight as well. A lot of what we have been, so a lot of the changes and reductions in services, where there have been reductions in this financial year, haven't really affected Portsmouth. And a lot of the services, it hasn't been closing services, but ensuring we're getting best value for money, that we're not paying twice for things, or where we've had to reduce perhaps the scale of the service. And some things have gone through the Hampshire the Hampshire Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee, where there have been changes and reductions in some of the discharge services and community bed facilities, but no actual closures, just a reduction in scale. You're right, that may change as we move forward and as we move into 24-25, and a joint health overview and scrutiny committee may be a good way for the ICB to come and present that collectively to everyone.
Thank you.
I think that offer would be useful, Joe, because the public awareness of the fact that there are huge pressures on the NHS, and we're straying into item 8 now, is very, very high, and that can move into a lot of dissatisfaction and misunderstanding. So good communication is absolutely essential, which I'm sure you and your successors know. Any other questions? Oh, yes. Councillor Ashwell.
Yes, thank you. I think my question was actually on item 8. Yeah, sorry. I think my question's on...
We'll move on to... item 8 is the Health and Social Care Portsmouth report from the on the Integrated Care Board. Should we move straight to that then? And then I will ask, first of all, Joe, are you introducing this?
Yeah. So again, this talks in more detail about some of the pressures on the NHS that we're seeing, in particularly preparing for winter and our winter plan, and the need to reduce avoidable hospital admissions and increase our number of discharges, particularly for those patients who no longer meet the criteria to reside. That is quite high across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, so there's a lot of work being done with all partners to try and reduce that, to ensure that we are in as good a position as we can going through into the winter. The report again talks about the funding that we've referred to and the investments we're making in NHS dentistry. Again, that is to recognising the challenges, specific challenges we have in NHS dentistry across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. And so a number of schemes have been funded this financial year to really look at how we can improve access in the short term. And then there's some specific pieces in the report around Portsmouth and South East Hampshire and the Health and Care Portsmouth work that we've been doing with all partners in the city. And again, some of the specifics, the work we continue to do with the Hospitals Trust and all partners around QA to avoid ambulance handover delays and to reduce admissions and to increase the number of discharges and reduce any patients that are blocking unnecessarily. Again, lots of work was done in that, and I know you've got the Hospitals Trust themselves there who may want to comment on that in the later report. And then again, all the work we've been doing around mental health and the Health Hub to improve access and that early intervention and health approach. So they were some of the main things really from the report. Oh, sorry, I think you're on mute there, sorry.
Yeah, muted.
Councillor Ashwell, is this a good time to bring you in?
Yes, thank you. Joe, thanks for the report. I'm just going to go back on the about that ambulance handover. Obviously, where it's not been great. You've said in the report it has deteriorated even further. And do you really hope there's going to be improvement now the winter's coming?
I think we're doing a huge amount of work with the hospital and with all system partners, because I think we've always been clear this isn't just a hospital issue or an ambulance issue. It involves the local authorities, adult social care and the community partners. We had seen some real improvement over the summer. However, I think we had a number of challenges, in part due to the industrial action and some of the challenges that caused, some changes in approach around discharges, some of the funding we were talking about earlier being reduced, having to reduce funding or really tighten up on how we approach the funding and how we manage the discharge to assess process has, despite everyone's best efforts, caused some delays in that sort of late summer, early September, which we've struggled to kind of recover from. However, there is a huge, a real commitment and a huge amount of work being undertaken. I don't want to steal too much of Penny and John's thunder, but we're working very closely with national support team. The Get It Right First Time team have been in and working with all partners. We're continuing to work with SCAS because we know we have high conveyances, particularly of older people in this area. So again, really looking at how we can strengthen our care home support so that we have telemedicine to all of our care homes. So doing some work looking at care homes which have the high attendances and trying to reduce those and doing some targeted work with the homes, as well as all the work along discharge. I think it is undoubtedly going to be a difficult winter because we are seeing not just the pressures in the NHS, but increasing demand across the system. But we are doing everything we can, working with all partners to reduce the harm to patients and to minimise the risks and minimise risk of ambulance handover delays. So the Trust have been doing a lot of work internally that I'm sure they will be able to talk to you about how they can work to minimise those delays as much as possible.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Thank you.
Joe, before I knew I was going to chair this meeting, I'd prepared a question for you. Is everybody else happy if I go ahead with that? just in general, I know because I did a lot of work over the years on integrated care and on whole system reform, that Portsmouth Portsea Isle, Portsmouth as an area had got quite far ahead with integrated working compared with some parts of Hampshire. A lot of us who've been engaged in commissioning across Hampshire for over many years, which I have been, were worried that there were initiatives that were working well in Portsmouth, where the advantages of being a small, densely packed island and people knowing each other and so on and so forth had led to better outcomes for patients in some cases, would be overlooked by the Hampshire and Isle of Wight ICB, possibly necessarily, but in a way that could have put some of those good services and therefore outcomes at risk. I know you're about to go, and I'm happy to put you on the spot on this one, because you've also put quite a lot of your career into the creating integrated and therefore services with better outcomes in Portsmouth. Can you name any services where this has happened and things you think we therefore ought to investigate as a health overview and scrutiny team?
That's a good question. I think that where integration is working well and where we have invested that time, and we have some really good examples of that integration in the city, our learning disability services, some of our mental health services and children's services. I think we are leading the way across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, and people are really looking at Portsmouth and the benefits that integration can bring. So I think it's, it's proving its own story. And I don't think, we've had lots of conversations about it in this committee and in other committees. And I don't think there's any intention to uncouple any of that. And CHC is another really good example of that, where we've created, some really good integration and improved outcomes for Portsmouth residents. There are, even despite that, and within that, there are areas of challenge that we've talked about today just in this meeting. So around the Mental Health Act assessment, the delays in that, the process delays, and again around the Hospitals Trust. So I think they're the areas where we've come a long way in Portsmouth, but we've still got further to go, and need to work with all partners across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight to continue to strengthen that integration. And again, I think there's lots of commitment to do that. The Health and Care Portsmouth infrastructure, if you like, and the partnership board, we're widening those meetings so that the Hospitals Trust and the new Healthcare Trust will be members of those boards, so we'll be able to look at how we make decisions about any funding that does come into the city and the Section 75 arrangements. So I think that will all be really positive, but again, we still need to keep going on that journey, really, and lots of commitment from ICB colleagues and local authority colleagues to do that.
Thank you very much. That's helpful. Yes, one more question from Graham Heaney, or is it at a residual hand, Graham?
That's a new one. I just want, it's an observation, but sort of a question as well. On page 91 and paragraph 235, it talks about it's the best start for life family hub expansion. And reading that paragraph, it seems to me like this is the resurrection of Sure Start centres, which were dismantled some years ago. And I just wondered if my observation is in any way accurate.
I think they are similar, yes. I don't think they're as extensive as the Sure Start programmes were, but it certainly is a recognition of the need to do that's early support to families, and that one-stop shop. So yes, similar, but perhaps not quite the same, a newer version.
Thank you for that. You know you're getting old when an initiative comes back for the third time in your career. And it's, of course, early years care is absolutely essential. It is my absolute personal passion, having worked across the country on commissioning for that sort of thing. So I'm glad we're getting some of a share of that. Early years are so important. Mark, are you happy for me to carry on in the chair?
Yes, by all means. Sorry, I was sick. So
it's all right. Welcome back.
Carry on. Yeah. Thank you.
Welcome back. So, with your permission, I'll move on to the last substantive item of the agenda, which is the briefing paper, item 9. And at the end of that, of course, we can thank Jo and say farewell. Jo, would you like to? No, we have people here from the hospital. Jo, are you going to stay with us, or?
Yes.
Well, let's thank Jo now. Let's thank Jo now with a traditional clap, and we can all be seen clapping because I think Jo's done tremendous service for us.
Oh, thank you. That's really nice.
Everybody like to clap?
Thank you.
We can all see our hands waving about.
I can. Thank you very
Jo,
much.
I think you've done tremendous service in Portsmouth and have indeed worked to improve the outcomes for thousands of patients in many ways. So good luck with your next steps. Now can I ask
Thank you.
John Knighton, who's here, to introduce agenda item 9.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Actually, my Chief Executive, Penny, has also joined us, and I suspect Penny might want to go first.
Welcome, Penny.
Thank you.
But then I will absolutely be there to take any questions as well, of course.
Yeah, really happy to. I'll keep it brief, but I'll try and link to where Jo left us as well. So you've had the paper. It covers 2 substantive items, really, the partnership and now group between Portsmouth Hospitals and the Isle of Wight NHS Trust, and then Winter. So if I just finish off the conversation about Winter that Jo alluded to before, because I think what we've set out here in this paper is a large part of where we're focused as a hospital trust, but also how that links to some of the things that Jo described. So Jo talked about the focus on making sure that we were only admitting patients who needed to be admitted, and that's as much about what we do in the community to make sure that we're keeping people well at home as it is about the choices we make in the hospital. And she also talked about discharges and making sure that patients who no longer need to be in the hospital are where they would prefer to be. Because really we need to be making sure that patients are in our care for a shorter time as possible and return to their normal place of residence. Those 2 pieces are really important for us to keep in balance, because without that we get into the position that's described for the critical incident where our hospital becomes overfull, which leads to significant delays, and you talked about that characterising itself in terms of the delays you see outside the hospital in ambulances. There's a third bit though to what Jo described, which is what are the things that we can do internally that can try to improve that balance between the admission and the discharges, and that's around our internal processes, and those are described in there in terms of some of the things that we have either done through critical incident where we've got into extreme difficulty, and things that are embedded in our winter plan and our business as usual. So a key part of that are things like our same-day emergency care facilities, which is about trying to make sure that we are turning patients round in less than the 24-hour period so that we're freeing up those beds overnight, but equally where it's the right thing to do, that patients are able to access services directly rather than needing to come through the emergency department. And all of that comes back together in our winter plan, the first priority of which is absolutely the safety of our patients. And the piece that you were exploring with Jo was the impact that delays can have not only on our patient experience, but on our ability to get an emergency response to our patients as quickly as we would want them to, and as quickly as needs to be in order to get the right outcome for our population. So what we've described here are all the things we're doing ourselves, but equally, as Joe said, working really closely with our partners, because it has to be across the urgent care pathway that we've got the right capacity in place and that we're working in a way that joins up care for our population. So I'll stop there in terms of a brief introduction, and then John and I are very happy to answer specific questions on any of that.
John, do you want to say anything else?
No, thank you very much, Councillor. I'm, as Penny said, very happy to take any questions that people have on the report, conscious of time, so I'll just wait for questions, I think.
Okay, any questions then? Again, I've got a pre-prepared question while you're all thinking. I mean, this is, we know you're making tremendous efforts and that it's very, very difficult, and we know about the financial cuts and the difficulties, but we have immensely long waiting lists, and I don't doubt if any of us don't know somebody who's waited, you know, probably more than 65 weeks, which is one of your targets. And people, this is contributing to people losing faith in the NHS at a time when we really, as a nation, don't need that to happen, in my view. What is are the realistic chances of reducing those waiting lists?
Yeah, so I'm happy to start with that, and then John might want to come in on some specific pieces, because of course reducing the waiting list, we need to make sure that we keep that focus on throughout the winter as well. In the context of the pressures that I've just described to you, we've got some particular specialties where the waiting times are longer than we would want them to be. ENT is a particular area, trauma and orthopaedics is probably another, where our patients will be experiencing long waits. There's probably two key things for me to draw out before John goes into some of the clinical aspects of it. The first is the validation exercise that we have just gone through. So we have been in contact with every patient who has been on the waiting list for more than 12 weeks to make sure that they still require that appointment. And we have seen a significant number of patients who didn't need to be on the waiting list removed from the waiting list, which means that we're then better able to get to the patients who really need our care. That's an administrative validation process, and running alongside that we have our clinical validation process and safety measures to make sure that the extended waits are not contributing to increasing risk for our patients as well. But the key really to your question is making sure that we do keep the capacity running, not only through our inpatient overnight beds, but through day case surgery and also through our outpatient procedures as well. This is not all patients who are waiting to come into the hospital for an operation and then spend some time in the hospital. Much of this is diagnostic or outpatient waiting times as well. But John, do you want to add anything to that?
Thank you, if I may, yes. So picking up from where you left off, I think there are, I mean, everyone will recognise there are several drivers that have contributed to those waiting list volume size and the time that some people are waiting, all of which are unacceptable, but they are, I guess, understandable. And most recently, in addition to the effects of COVID and, of course, the health of the population, the impact of industrial action have been real. They have had an impact over the course of this last year. In addition to what Penny said around the administrative, if you like, validation of those waiting lists, we're looking at where clinical validation, so really going back to the question of, does this patient need and want that procedure that they were originally listed for, where it's operative, but also in the outpatient area, are we following up too many patients, and is there an opportunity to generate more new outpatient spaces by reducing the number of follow-up appointments that we manage, and activating patients, if that's acceptable phrase, in their own follow-up. So giving them a safety net and a route back in when necessary, but not necessarily routinely following them up. I guess the other thing that we're doing, and we're doing this in Portsmouth Hospital, but we're also doing it across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight as a collaborative, is looking at how we can make sure that we use every bit of NHS resource to its full capability and capacity through a series of different elements that you might put under productivity. And if in the headlines, I guess, for particularly operative procedures, that would be making sure that we are using our theatres as productively as possible, and where there is capacity in one organisation or another, is there a way we can support patients to get their procedure done wherever that capacity is available, focusing on the way in which we manage patients to minimise their admitted length of stay for those that need to come in for a procedure. And there is definitely opportunity in there. And particularly looking at something that actually Portsmouth hospitals in many specialties is very advanced at, which is ensuring that the maximum number of patients who are able to have their procedure done as a day case is optimised. Because of course, every time you do a procedure as a day case rather than an inpatient, actually the evidence suggests that the outcomes and experience when that's done correctly are better for patients, and it liberates a bed day that is able to be used for someone who has to come in. So those are I guess those are key headlines that apply to a whole raft of different opportunities to use the capacity we have, as well as being creative and constructive in the way we use capacity across a wider footprint, not just in our hospital, to make sure that we do all we can do to minimise and reduce those delays.
Thank you. Any other questions from members of the panel? Mark Jeffrey, Councillor Jeffries. Jeffrey.
Thank you. One of the things that I sort of struggle with, I guess, with when I get reports at HOSP is that is the comparison. So we know that there are 10 critical incident days in November, but how would that compare to, you know, a typical year, if there's such a thing? So going back to say 2017, how many critical days would have the hospital had in 2017 or 18 or 19? I know that's sort of, you probably don't have the figures to hand, but when we get the reports, it's sometimes these sort of standalone figures could be sort of meaningless.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point, isn't it? And of course, comparing a day or the number of days that are declared as critical incident isn't necessarily, even if we were giving that comparative figure, it doesn't necessarily tell you the whole picture, because the criteria by which we declare or define a critical incident shifts from one year to the next as we get better at doing some things and as pressures manifest in different areas. So they are called for different circumstances sometimes, although perhaps with the same or similar underlying causes.
Would it be something you could do in the future, is to do that comparison? I think that would be useful too. Whatever the causes are, you're under exceptional pressure for whatever reason, and that if that is gradually creeping up, it's a matter of public and individual concern.
I wonder whether I'm sure we can do something that might be useful, and it might be helpful if we, in so doing, perhaps not looked just at the number of critical incident days, because that you could argue that might just be a symptom or a marker of what's going on. But I think what you're really wanting to see, I think, is what are driving those pressures, and we could look for some things that might be helpful in a more detailed conversation about what the underlying drivers of that situation is.
Yeah, and I think what might be helpful, because the reasons why we are needing to call critical incidents for capacity as opposed to when we had the flood a couple of years ago are because we are reaching levels where you then see the delays absolutely exacerbating. And as John has said, the level at which we call those changes depending on the circumstances, but one of the biggest drivers of why we reach those points is the level of occupancy in the hospital. So what we could probably provide is some comparative data in terms of occupancy and then associated delays, because that would give you a probably a better picture of what's sitting behind your question, I think, which is how do we judge the relative pressure that the organisation is under, I think is what you're looking for. Yeah.
I mean, I think the similar need for us to see a very simple graph that we can then get behind if we want to in this overview and scrutiny panel. It also applies to the winter plan. I mean, your target is 76 of A&E patients to be admitted, transferred or discharged within 4 hours. My goodness, that's gone down, hasn't it? I mean, I used to be chair of the health authority in the southeast of Hampshire, and we would have been ashamed to have gone much below 88%. I remember we were made a terrific fuss about it. And that means that 25% of people, 24% of people on average are likely to be waiting in corridors. We just simply have to address that really seriously, I think. I mean, it isn't a good target, 76% really, is it?
The target when it was originally brought in many years ago was at 98% and it dropped to 95%, and that was consistently 95%. This is an improvement.
Exactly.
It's a performance target that we expect to improve back up to the 95% in terms of national expectations. So this is not that, nationally we think this is a reasonable level of performance, but it is a recognition of the capacity constraints and therefore the delays that people are experiencing. But no, you're absolutely right. It demonstrates the level of pressure and delay in the system that we currently have.
With the permission of the rest of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, I think we should really take this figure very, very seriously indeed and ask to have it a report on that, if nothing else. Certainly it was regularly over 90%, and when I was chair of the Health Commission and across this same geography, albeit some years ago, and this is a terrible figure to be aiming for.
Judith and Mark, you're
David
both
Evans.
muted.
Councillor David Evans.
Oh, thank you. Following that discussion about waiting time, I thought I would just the anecdotal fallacy is here, but I'm going to tell you what happened to me in waiting. This was 2 or 3 years ago. I managed to wear too heavy an overcoat in the doctor's surgery in Cow Plain, managed to pass out and was hooked up to a defibrillator and then carted off to QA for a checkout with ECG, is it? I think so. I was lying on a trolley in the corridor for 5 hours, and then when I was seen to, because people more seriously obviously kept going past. When I was seen to, I was wheeled into a room. They hooked me up again to the tester. It took about 2 or 3 minutes, and they decided there's nothing wrong with me, and I was free to go. Now, I'm a firm believer in the anecdotal fallacy. It doesn't work, but if that were the pattern, that people are just waiting because of that they haven't had any sort of assessment for several hours when they really don't need to be there at all, I'll just pass that on. There you go. That's me done. Thank you.
Thank you to Councillor Evans. Councillor Jeffreys.
Thank you. I was just wondering, are there measures that the trust are looking at to see whether? So I represent a ward in Portsmouth. So what I guess I'm asking is, are there measures that you're going to be looking at to see if the performance of the hospitals in Portsmouth has worsened because of the merger with the Isle of Wight Trust, and is that something that's actively being monitored, or are you just going to start from sort of like a zero base?
So we will continue to report the performance of the two organisations separately, because it's a partnership in a group rather than a merger of the two organisations. So Portsmouth Hospitals Trust and the Isle of Wight NHS Trust remain as two separate statutory organisations. So the baseline against which we're reporting is fixed. So that is our measure to make sure that we continue to improve our performance, regardless of the context, whether it be the partnership with the island or anything else. So we're not going to get to a place where you only see performance reported at the level of Portsmouth and the Isle of Wight together.
So is that, just as a follow-up, is that sort of data something that we could see at all?
So, I mean, it's the national performance standards, that some of which we put into this report, but is also reported monthly in our integrated performance report to the trust board. So it is publicly available.
Thank you.
Is that okay? I think this is tricky. Jo York.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say that if the committee did want to see more data or comparative data across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, then we could provide that through the ICB report, if that would be helpful.
Julie Richardson. I think you might be mute.
Sorry. You mentioned in your report that the Isle of Wight Trust has some unique challenges. Could you just tell me what some of those are?
So probably the most significant challenge is the workforce, and the availability of workforce on an island, and the costs. I'm sitting here today, that's why I'm using my hands like that, and the costs of attracting people to work on the island. That's the most significant piece probably, and not only the ability to attract and retain, but because some of the services are relatively small scale or are small scale, some of them are run by single-handed practitioners, the ability to maintain that service when it's, at risk from a change from one individual, that's probably the most unique feature, other than of course the Solent itself separating us through the partnership. But that is what's at the heart of some of the clinical service redesign that we're looking to do, which is to say, how do we get the benefit of scale that we've got in Portsmouth and people being part of a larger team, with needing to maintain services at a smaller scale to serve the island population.
Thank you.
Small population, smaller than the clinical caseloads of specialists, has always been a problem with the Isle of Wight. Good. Anything else? Any other comments or questions? And I think we're getting the feeling that it will be good to have some trends in this report, because certainly the point of time reporting you've given us here is pretty challenging for you, and I know you're trying to do your best with it and other changes, and there are some green shoots of innovations you're making that should make a difference. But I think what I'm picking up from you all is that it'd be good to have some very simple indicative graphs to look at as well, so that we know whether things are getting better.
We can certainly give you some data at time so that you can see the trends. That's not a problem. Yeah.
And I think probably I'm hearing that people are kind of, still, as you'd expect, slightly appalled by some of this. Again, we've got faith in you that you're going to get it better. But I think a report that we can actually compare with this one the next time round would be really useful, and to do that at our next meeting.
Yes, of course.
Okay, members, thank you very much for your participation. Do we have a date of the next meeting, please, Lisa?
Just bear with me. I think it's the 25th of January.
So we'll be halfway through the winter pressures there, and we should be able to get some idea of how it's all going. We of course here wish you every success because it's a pretty crucial year, I think. Anything else anybody else wants to say? In which case, I'm glad, Councillor Jeffrey. Vivian?
No, just thank you for the
in which case, I'm glad Councillor Jeffrey's returned to the meeting, and I hope you get better, and thank you all very much. If anybody else, anything to say before I close the meeting?
No, just best of luck to Joe.
Thank you.
Oh, best, of course, we did clap her earlier. Yes, Joe, thank you for your service and everything you've done.
Thank you.
Okay, I do declare this meeting over. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll just go and stop the live streaming.
Thank you.
Right, thanks for chairing the meeting. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you for the clap, and I wish you all very